The 6th chapter of the Lost Pages of Norse Myth was unveiled on the last day of February, and I enjoyed it so much I decided to set aside the other video I'm working on to focus on breaking it down in this one. It's probably tied with the first chapter as my favourite of the ones revealed so far. This story was essentially about the construction of the system of portals that were made to get around the 9 realms on the world tree Yggdrasil. It was shown very clearly in the most recent trailer, but we didn't know the background behind their creation until now. Throughout the course of this video, we will try to connect some of the events of this chapter with what was disclosed in the others. This chapter also established some key differences between the Norse world in God of War and what the Prose Edda documents of Norse mythology. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend that you watch my analysis of the other chapters, which I have linked down in the description below, as this is intended to be supplementary to its commentary. It turns out that the person responsible for this means of transportation is none other than Tyr, who is referred to as the god of law and justice. It's highly interesting that he is not referred to as a god of war, because he is a principal war god in Norse mythology. You could argue that this title may be reserved for Odin or Thor, but the former appears to be more associated with knowledge and wisdom, and the latter with thunder. The series is called God of War because of Kratos and his ascension to this status after killing Ares in the original game, but that was in a different era. Just like the logo evolved from the Omega symbol to the Othala rune to fit Norse mythology, it does make me wonder whether this gap in titles may be filled by Atreus in the future as a more noble god of war because of his father's teachings. The symbol of the Othala rune denotes ancestral spiritual power and divine inheritance after all. A noble war god kind of sounds antithetical, I know, but not if you are fighting for the right cause in a world as hostile and violent as this one. Tyr wanted to unite the realms by easing travel between them because it was said that they were previously separated by massive distances on the world tree. He was helped by thousands, and among the crowd were elves, men, dwarves, beasts, and Jotuns. It took them years to build a temple that would house this new method of getting around. The corpse of Thalmor is said to lie just northeast to this temple in the 3rd chapter, and his body formed a ridge of mountains around Caldera Lake. The art lead spoke about Kratos visiting this lake during the featured podcast. It's therefore very likely that Kratos will arrive at this temple since he is in the area, and that this will be how he travels to other realms. This is probably where the Witch of the Woods gets sucked into a portal, and it may end up being the structure that we see collapsing near the end of the story trailer. This would explain why Kratos later needs to carry a contraption that is connected to Yggdrasil for quickly traversing it. I know we see another area that houses a portal where Mimir is based, but this will be addressed later on because it doesn't resemble the hub of stonework that was described by the narrator. I am also sure that it would have been pointed out if Tyr had only one arm, which means that Fenrir is still in Asgard. When the power of Tyr's temple sparked to life, everyone ranging from men and elves to the gods would travel to different realms to bring news, and trading in goods and services became a lot easier. Tyr's plan to encourage the mingling of different races worked, at least for now. The Jotuns asked Tyr for a favour in return for the help they offered to build his temple, which would bring about a chain of events that had everlasting consequences. They wanted him to send Odin, the king of the Aesir, to negotiate a peace accord with them because their kind was being grossly victimised by Thor's merciless rampage with Mjolnir. According to attestations provided by the Prose Edda, no one killed more giants than Thor, and he was a rather bloodthirsty god, so this wasn't an aspect the developers created to give Kratos and Atreus a villain to go up against. Thor was indeed a bit of an asshole and nothing like the noble warrior that exists in the Marvel universe. Odin agrees to go to Jotunheim to broker a peace pact, but he had ulterior motives. After arriving, we are told that it is the first time he sets foot in this realm, which I found a tad peculiar. This is mostly because the first chapter of the Lost Pages revealed that he has only one eye, and according to Norse myth, he gave up the other one to Mimir in exchange for drinking from the Well of Wisdom. This well was found in Jotunheim, nourishing one of the roots of Yggdrasil, but it's possible that they moved it to Midgard for the purposes of the story they wanted to tell. This is made all the more plausible by the fact that Mimir himself is now based in Midgard. It's also peculiar because the Asgardians had access to the Bifrost Rainbow Bridge, which they could use to travel across Yggdrasil to other realms. It would burn the feet of anyone else that tried to use it, so no one had access to this method of transport outside of those that lived in Asgard. In the God of War universe, however, there is no Rainbow Bridge in Asgard, and each mystical portal is referred to as a Rainbow Bridge to another realm. This would explain why there is a greater diversity of races in Midgard. When Odin appeared before 6 colossal thrones in an enormous hall that was bigger than any chamber he had ever seen, he spoke to the giants about bringing Tyr as an agent of goodwill. Tyr stiffens upon hearing of this because it's said that he is just as likely to vouch for Odin's honour as he is to challenge his 8-legged horse to a race. This 8-legged horse is Sleipnir, who is featured on t-shirts with the label Norse Horse and the God of War website. Sleipnir was born out of the construction of walls that were built around Asgard to protect the Aesir from Jotuns and trolls. When a giant in disguise arrived at Asgard proposing to build walls for protection, he asked for the sun, moon and Freya in return, and the gods agreed because Loki persuaded them to. It looked like he was going to finish it in time, so Loki turned into a mare to distract the giant's horse, who was indispensable for carrying out this Herculean task. The result of these two mating was Sleipnir, who was gifted to Odin. Meanwhile, the giant Tharmor was at work on building walls around the giant's kingdom in Jotunheim to protect them from the Aesir. The kingdom was called Utgard, and it was where the Jotun king Utgarda-Loki lived. As the god of law and justice, this brought about Tyr's desire to build a bridge between these two races instead of more walls. It's just too bad that Odin gets in the way of this. He came to their land in pursuit of knowledge and requested the knowledge of foresight in exchange for Mjolnir to negotiate the accord. However, Odin never intended to present them with Mjolnir, as he merely wanted to use these negotiations as a distraction so that he could spy on the tapestries and triptychs of the chamber containing forbidden knowledge. Triptychs were works of art carved out on 3 distinct but connected panels, and if my memory serves correctly, they were also a part of the architecture in the games of the Greek era. I think these paintings possess clearer depictions of the events that build up to Odin's ultimate doom and how the twilight of the gods plays out when it arrives. While Groa's vision made him aware that this was going to happen, it didn't give him any information on how to stop it, which must have been why he became desperate to visit this particular chamber in Jotunheim. He knew about Kratos and Atreus' fates being entwined with the coming of Ragnarok, but the final triptych he spied was what tipped him off on the journey that they take after the death of the mother. The painting probably looked very similar to the cover art in showing the duo travelling towards the mountaintop that we keep seeing in the distance. These revelations have convinced me that Odin will be the overarching villain in this story, but I think he will be acting through another god for most of it, if not all of it. I'm predicting that it'll either be Thor or Loki, or even both. Kratos' presence in the Norse world was compared to a bull in a china shop in terms of alerting the gods to where he is, so we know they will factor in a big way somehow. When Odin was caught inspecting what was supposed to be hidden knowledge, the giants sounded an alarm in the form of a huge bell. They attempted to capture him, but he turned into a hawk and flew through the fingers of the Jotun that tried to grab him. Tyr was spared because they knew of his pure heart, but it was on the condition that the rainbow bridge between his temple and Jotunheim is sundered, forever sealing it away from all the other realms. All giants would be recalled from Midgard to live in Jotunheim in sacred peace and solitude, where they would remain until Ragnarok, giving the impression that it may be closer than we think. It definitely won't happen in this game or even the second, but I can see the third game centering around it when Atreus is an adult. This explains why the Jotuns randomly left before completing Thalmor's temple, so we can already start to make connections in the timeline. If you watched my analysis of the story trailer, you will remember that I made the deduction that Jotunheim would be the first of the outside realms that Kratos and Atreus visit. Mimir tells Kratos that he is the only one that can get him to where he needs to go, and with the news that Jotunheim was cut off from the network of portals running from Tyr's temple, this makes perfect sense. I believe I found some further evidence that supports this. Just before we get a close-up at Mimir, we see statues around the temple. Examining one more closely reveals the face of a Jotun at the top with the word Heim written underneath in the runic alphabet. If this assessment is correct, it pretty much confirms that we will journey to the land of the giants first. The request of the Jotuns to sever the connection to their realm was most of all to cut off Odin, who they called their sworn enemy. Instead of brokering a peace pact with them, he was looking for a means to bring about their end because of the prophecy that they would team up with Loki's children to fight against him. This continues to build on one of the main themes we discussed in my previous video, that I believe PS4's God of War will continue on from the other games, that of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead of being a good father that fostered sincere relationships with his children, Kronos sought to imprison them in his belly because he was told by the fates that one of them would rise up against him. This is what resulted in Zeus's escape at the hands of Rhea and fueled the vengeance that caused the very thing Kronos was trying to prevent. The same happened with Zeus, who acted out of fear by imprisoning Deimos and trying to kill Kratos because an oracle foretold of a marked one ending the reign of Mount Olympus. Instead of seeking to heal his fractured relationship with Kratos when he killed Ares and became the god of war, things got even worse. He could have fulfilled the initial promise of the gods to take away his nightmares, for example. The irony continues with Odin, who was so obsessed with preventing Ragnarok that he ended up damaging relations with other races beyond repair. Despite being irrational, they all acted on legitimate human fears, which is one of the reasons why we find these stories so riveting. The Jotuns were quite diplomatic in their attempts to negotiate an accord with the Aesir, but Odin was too busy thinking about removing them from the picture so he would never have to worry about them again in the future. This must have really driven Santa Monica's decision to go with Norse mythology first, because of Kratos' reaction to this happening all over again when he is trying to stay as far away as possible from the person he used to be, but can't help being trapped yet again with his family at risk one more time. If Odin really was behind the attack on Kratos' family that resulted in the death of the mother, he has also unknowingly nurtured the rage that would come back to bite him in Groa's vision. Atreus would be victimized for the same reasons that threaten the Jotuns and Loki's children. As mentioned earlier, Norse mythology illustrates an abstract concept of the world tree Yggdrasil holding the 9 realms. Before the events of this game, Kratos was only ever in Midgard in the area of Greece, so he wasn't aware that these other dimensions existed until now. As you go on the journey, he will learn about the other realms and is taught about how to move between them in order to accomplish his ultimate goal, which I think is related to the aforementioned device. The realms aren't defined in a lot of detail in Norse mythology, so it'll be very interesting to hear descriptions from Mimir for an idea of what Sony Santa Monica have added or tweaked. Even before the story trailer was shown, I remember discussing the possibility of using portals as a method of traversing the world tree because this was how Marvel handled it. On the other hand, the way they're handling Yggdrasil in its representation is going to be very unique, but the art leads did not want to divulge any further details. The artists on the podcast tacitly confirmed that Kratos will visit Helheim at some point on his adventure. They touched on the idea that Corey came up with of the characteristics of the realms guiding the story. What this means is that the order in which you visit the realms will depend on the mood of the story. For example, Helheim is the coldest and darkest realm, so it will be there at the lowest point of the story for Kratos and Atreus. It was the realm of the dishonourable dead and those who were not brave enough to go to Valhalla because they died of sickness or old age. It is said that anyone who arrives in Helheim will never feel joy and happiness again, so it may come at a point when all hope seems lost for Kratos achieving his end goal. This indirectly explains the choice of runes in the logo and their significance, because they actually represent each realm. I know this because the exact same runes are drawn on the limited edition of the PS4 Pro, and the PlayStation blog told us that they represent each realm when explaining the design. So taken together, they sum up the moods of each main story beat, and it probably means that we will get to see all of the realms in this game. I thought that perhaps they would save some for sequels, but evidence is pointing in the other direction, especially when they keep reiterating that they are making a very big game. Alternatively, it may be plotting an overarching story that is planned for a trilogy, with this game tackling a third of the runes shown. They added that puzzles will be more environment based this time too. This does have the potential downside that there won't be contraptions that are as elaborately designed as the ones of the Greek era. Even though their inclusion made it feel more like you were playing a game, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. On the flip side, it doesn't mean they can't create unique scenarios like having to throw the axe and keep it there to stay alive while dragas come at you from another angle. They may feel more natural with each one having a specific reason in the narrative for existing. The E3 2016 demo alluded to environmental storytelling playing a huge role in this entry after all. And when Corey was asked about how many puzzles there will be, it was affirmed that this game will be no different to the others in terms of balancing all the different elements of traversal, puzzle, story and combat. It's therefore safe to say that there will be quite a few if they are going to be used to break up the other components for more variety. My next video will focus more on the combat and exploration pillars of this reimagined experience, but there are also some points I want to make about the story, particularly with regards to things that stuck out to me during the text adventure of Atreus' Call from the Wilds. As of recording, members of the press across Europe have been invited to play a 3-hour gameplay demo, with the embargo for their impressions lifting on the 19th of March. So hopefully the video will make the wait a bit easier for those who are very eager to hear more about what the game will actually play like in the final build. Stay tuned for it over the next few days, and I will speak to you all again very soon.